All right, we ready?
Do you want me to turn it off and turn it on again?
No. It's all right.
Yeah, he can edit.
Hello, Wanderers. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Jess.
And this is Wicked Wanderings. Hello, Jess.
Hello, Hannah.
Hi, John.
Hello.
We are so excited to have you back.
Thank you for inviting me back.
Always.
You've been asked for, so
Yes.
no one listens to us unless you're here now. So
That is not true.
we need to put him on an intermittent schedule because then it's kind of like gambling. It's like you never know when he's going to come.
Yes. It's the most effective conditioning, right?
Yes, it is, actually. I will be honest and say I'm not sure where I'm going with my episodes this time.
Sweet.
I want to talk about asylums and their histories as well as the hauntings that have been recorded. But with my background in psychology and working in the mental health field, I also want to give a background on what mental health was like back then and where it is now.
Hopefully different.
Also,
We both know it is.
I think it is important to understand the history of how individuals with mental health were treated in these facilities, because then it will also help us understand why they are still haunting some of those locations still.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So during this, I want to talk about the different methods that were used that were inhumane treatments and downright fucking terrible ways to treat human beings. And while I do not know where this episode or episodes are going, I hope you will all come in the ride with me. I also want to add a trigger warning to this episode because some of the things I talk about are hard to hear and the way people were treated were inhumane and abhorrent. It is, however, important to know our history in order to not repeat it. So are we all good with that?
I'm down.
Okay.
I'm on board.
All right. So we're going to start in 1751, where the Quakers helped petition for a hospital to help with people with mental disabilities. But there was also another reason why they were doing this. In 1756, the hospital was established, and it was basically a jail for those who live there to protect the community from them. And by the way, so the Quakers were the first ones to build a mental hospital, which I thought was very interesting.
And where is this?
This was in Pennsylvania.
I thought it might be in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
At least it's not the Puritans. That's all I have to say.
Damn fucking Ann Putnam. The hospital was then treated like a sideshow for the public. They would go and gawk at the people who were there and would get them riled up, especially the individuals that were chained. In 1760, a fence was put up around the facility, but this did not stop the public. The hospital then decided they might as well charge people a fee to come and see their patients, so the public was then charged 4 pence to enter.
That's so messed up.
Isn't that terrible?
Ugh.
So they were basically a sideshow for the public. It's like, oh, Sunday afternoon after church, let's go poke at people.
But that was not unusual.
Mm-mm.
You hear stories like the hospital that they later termed, I think it was Bethlehem Hospital, but they called it Bedlam Hospital. Might not be getting my facts straight, but that was like the original place in London where you could go and gawk at people, whether they were prisoners or they were mentally handicapped or just deranged or a mixture of those. So it was common in England. I'm not surprised it came to the colonies.
Dr. Benjamin Rush came to the hospital in 1783. He was known as the father of American psychiatry. Rush came into the hospital hoping to reform. Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He advocated to abolish slavery and prison reform. Rush got a new wing put into Pennsylvania Hospital, where patients were given nicer beds and areas to live. He allowed patients that had, quote, good behavior to be able to walk the halls, attend classes of sewing and such. He provided typical companions to encourage friendship and social skills. While this is all progressive thinking for the time, the men in the field that Rush knew about and associated with also had different ideals for healing or fixing the mentally ill.
So really, this is like the beginnings of behavior modification, in a sense. Reinforcement for your good behavior.
Yeah, I think we've had that through history. It's just, for some reason, ABA gave it a name.
Oh, they wanted to make it cool.
Yeah, I guess so. Scientists were stating that in order to make these people less unruly, that beating them until they are submissive or fainting is the way to go. They would give them such things as mercury to induce vomiting so the patients would not have energy to have episodes. These scientists justified what they were doing by saying that because the patients were thinking of the pain, it took their mind off the ranting and raving they usually engaged in.
Oh my God, this is horrible already.
Yes. Oh, it gets worse. They also starved the patients as a way to keep them quiet. Another method was called blistering. They would rub mustard powder on shaved scalps, and the blisters were formed, and then they rubbed another item, causing severe pain and infection. And this would also cause the patient to rub in other areas, causing severe pain. So like they rub there, they end up rubbing other places. And one doctor said this helped the patient come back to his true self and remember who he really was.
Is this like the same stuff like mustard gas?
What do you mean?
Like,
tell me.
Mustard gas, the biological warfare.
Oh,
like
it could be.
I don't know.
Because later on, I'll actually get into how we had a big influence on what the Nazis did in Germany.
Oh, okay.
We were not innocent.
No.
You think, oh, we were the allies, we were the good people. No. Especially when it came to the gas chambers, it kind of actually started here in America and went over. I mean, granted, Hitler took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah. I figure the good person is whoever writes history.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
Because of these horrific treatments these individuals were given, the patients would only have to see certain staff and cower away because they did not want what happened before to happen to them. So like if whoever inflicted the pain on them, if they just saw them, they would just like clam up, which is with any trauma or abuse victim.
I was going to say PTSD right there.
Exactly. The mere sight of certain staff quieted them and caused them to be frightened. In 18th century, there were madhouses for the elite. So let's say you're tired of your wife. She doesn't necessarily have to have done anything wrong, but you have noticed she is speaking up for herself or maybe having an individual thought. God forbid.
Do not get me started.
I know you said 18th century, and I don't mean to fast forward, but Commodore Vanderbilt, 19th century, founder of the Vanderbilt fortune, he would basically put his wife in and out of asylums for silly things like she didn't want to move from Staten Island to Manhattan. Bam.
Oh my God.
So these were used with, people who should be treated by medical professionals were put into these asylums, but also people used it as a threat and control out of people who were totally normal.
We actually end up talking about the Rockefellers later on. So it's like these huge men and families that were in power using their money for just
whatever.
What I would consider sinful things.
Do you get into the hysteria?
So I will say that what I'm covering in this episode only goes so far.
Okay.
But if you think that I've passed that part of time, feel free.
Well, honestly, I don't know much about it, but it's like stuff like that, like women standing up for themselves or being moody or, it's that time of the month. We better put them in the mental institution.
And I think if our listeners know us at all, they'll know how feministic we are.
True.
So like I said, like if your wife is just not talking the way you want her to, you go to the doctor agrees with you, you pay the doctor for his time, and the madhouse pays the doctor for his referral. And if you are a doctor who owns the madhouse, even better, you get double paid. There was actually a man named William Batty who left an estate ranging from 100 to 200,000 pounds because of this trade, which nowadays would be in the millions.
Wow.
Sheesh.
I know. So different water therapies were introduced. And this is not, what your grandma does at the Jewish Community Center or YMCA. Dunking heads in water, blindfolding patients so they fell into a vat of water.
So water baths, water bathing, or, like a form of torture where they stick their head underwater.
Waterboarding.
Waterboarding. Thank you.
Throwing patients into the sea so they almost drown. Putting a box with holes on their head and submersing them in water. One gentleman invented a cage that the patient would be put in and then lowered into water. A chair was then invented that would swivel a person at high speeds, causing vomiting, defecating, and or dizziness. And beds... Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering what their thought process was. Like, how did they think this was going to heal? I don't think... Well, maybe that's the thing, is they didn't think it was going to heal them. It was just to manage their behavior. Okay. I just answered my own question.
Beds were also made to swivel at high speeds, and a machine where they could put more than one patient at a time was also made. So it was basically looked like a ride you would see at a carnival, but they would just spin them until basically
oh my God,
their brain is mush.
No thanks.
Yeah. Getting back to Rush, in the States, though he was a Quaker and he seemed to have humane ideas, he was an educated man who actually educated at the University of Edinburgh and also wanting to follow in the footsteps of his counterparts across the pond, which this is not a good thing. Let's also think about the amount of proclaimed doctors in America, which wasn't America yet, by the way, obviously, but what we know as America. to think about how many of them actually had educations. So fewer than 5% had degrees and about 10% had actual training. So this reminds me of the witch trials, where Jess pointed out several times, I believe, that these men did not even have theological training or law training, and they were messing with people's lives.
Yes. Also, like, IDs weren't a thing. Certificates weren't a thing. You could go anywhere and be like, oh, I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
And practice without zero training. All you had was your charisma to prove that you knew what you were doing.
I'm reading a wonderful book, and I know we're still in the 18th century, but the book is called Shadows in the Valley, A Cultural History of Illness, Death, and Loss in New England, 1840 to 1916, which of course is ahead of what you're talking about. But and the author's name is Alan Swedlund. I'm sorry if I butchered that last name. Fabulous book. I'm only halfway through. But Alan gives really wonderful context into where we were in this period of time in medical history. And I mean, you're already talking about how so few actually had training. Alan does the exact same thing. He sets the stage and says, most of these people had never been to a college for medicine. We were really lucky, and you had a really good physician if they'd had some sort of internship for a year and then were set loose. So this trend continues. It doesn't end at the 18th century. It goes straight through until the end of the 19th.
What was the name of the book?
It's called Shadows in the Valley.
In the Valley.
It's a great book.
Adding to cart.
It's very medical heavy, but it's good.
So on a good cognitive day.
Yes.
Rush had similar beliefs like his counterparts across the pond, that madness was caused by morbid and irregular actions in the blood vessels of the brain. I'm going to quote from Robert Whitaker's book, Mad in America, some of the reasons this irregularity would happen according to Rush. So here I quote, an injury to the brain, too much labor, extreme weather, worms, consumption, constipation, masturbation, intense study, and too much imagination.
So pretty much I'd be tortured. Basically is what that says.
I mean, that's a normal day.
Right.
Rush was proud of his invention called the tranquilizer chair. Do you think this sounds like a good invention?
I'm nervous.
Probably not.
He would bound patients in a seated position so they could not move and place a wooden contraption on their head so they could not see. And a bowl with a hole in the chair was placed underneath so patients could go to the bathroom because they would be in the chair for long periods of time.
I mean, at least he's thinking of that.
Wow. You're fired. You're
I'm
fired.
just kidding. I had high hopes for Benjamin Rush.
Rush became famous in the field, causing other physicians to use his invention. And one said he left his patient in it for 6 months.
6 months?
6 months.
Okay. No.
Yeah.
Damn it, Benjamin.
Another movement occurred where other physicians were starting to use the water therapy, the spinning therapy, and Rush's invention. A Dr. Willard, who had a small madhouse on the border of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, had a tank made on premise that he would use on patients. He would put them in a coffin-like box with holes and dunk them in the tank. When the bubbles ceased, he pulled them and revived them. He is quoted to say he did this, quote, to break the patient's will and make him learn that he had a master, end quote.
Oh my God. That would freak me out. I have a fear of drowning and being confined in small places. I would die.
I think of the people and the kids I work with right now. It bothers me to the core. And it irks me like nothing else that this stuff was happening. But it was normal. And then I'm starting thinking, all right, what is normal in our life now that I'm accepting that I'm not doing anything about?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I know in my core
sure.
that I'm not okay with.
Yeah. I have comments about that, but I feel like you're going to get there later. So
it's okay if you have a comment if you want to tell me.
Well, it was just going to talk about residential placements now as opposed to like asylums.
Yeah.
And the lack of resources that the mental health field has. So.
I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah.
I really don't get past World War II during this episode, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm very opinionated about that, and you guys will find out why.
There was a man named Penal. Penal.
I like Penal.
I don't know what it is. It's Pinel.
Penal?
Pinel. He's from France. Pinel.
Pinois?
Penal. There's no A though.
It's Pinal.
And EL.
Pinal. We can move past this.
Yeah, okay. Mr. P.
Yes, there's a man named Mr. P from France and a group of English Quakers that both started reforming the way the mentally ill were treated. Mr. P reformed hospitals so that patients were treated more like people and less like animals. Wow, so novel.
Amazing.
The Quakers made their own place for the mentally ill to come where they had tea parties and friendship. It is nice to see that not everyone back then was an asshole. Fun fact, the first public asylum, so for us lowly people and not the rich, was founded in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1833.
Well, shit. Look at that.
Mm-hmm. So the Quakers had theirs, but obviously it wasn't a public one because they were the first ones. But the first public one was in Worcester.
Are you sure it's not Worcester?
No.
Sorry. Just kidding. Sorry, Jonathan, I interrupted.
I was going to ask, what was the name of the asylum?
I talk about it later on. I'm pretty sure I talk about it later on.
Because Massachusetts has a bunch that...
And I actually looked it up because it's not
ones.
There anymore. But there's actually some really beautiful pictures because Worcester has like a historical foundation or wherever. And I looked it up and they have some beautiful pictures of it.
Okay. Idea. I know you are the king of the spooky weekends.
Yes.
However, mental asylums of New England.
I would get on that bus tour.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Okay. Sorry.
Love it.
Just putting that out there.
The idea of the wanted asylum would reward good behavior by letting you pick your room, strolling about the grounds, and even going into town on occasion, as long as you came back in time and no drinking. Restraining was a last resort. They were given cutlery to eat and even hosted a ball with the public. With this movement towards humane treatment also meant that there was no use for physicians. Some of these hospitals were started by Quakers, and they did not want physicians coming in and trying out the latest inhumane fad on their patients. The boards consisted of non-physicians or physicians who lost belief in these physical treatments. Doctors were noticing that their position in mental care was becoming non-existent, with success rates of patients going up.
Go figure. Treat them like humans and then they'll improve.
And this is why doctors started to golf. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just making that up. With this, doctors were not going to let this happen without a fight. Now, I do want to add that I am not against doctors. I want to make that clear. I think medicine has come far, but
there's always room for improvement.
These guys, as my colleague just puts it, are douche canoes. Asylums? Asylums were using chemical restraints like opium and morphine. Because of this, it led to the use of physical restraints such as straitjackets due to how crowded these facilities were getting. Utica Lunatic Asylum in New York used a crib-like structure that had a lid with a hinge that they would leave patients in. Imagine the claustrophobia this would cause. In 1844, the association made it official that the use of physical restraints was for the bettering of humanity. Sorry.
I can go off right now, but I'll still wait. All this
Speak your anger.
Okay, so if you want me to tell my story now, because it includes restraints.
Yeah.
So the agency I used to work for, that I will not name, had a separate part of it, because if I say that separate part, it will be known to people who read the news. They would improperly restrain the clients there and lock them indoors if they were getting, like, in a padded room, if they were getting, like, escalated, whatever. When you have children with trauma who experience that and who have triggered from being touched, that starts a whole nother layer to that trauma, right? And so it adds on to, like, all the layers. And so the agency was actually, there's lawsuits against them for the improperly restrained. But that's also a thing with the mental health field nowadays, is they hire people at minimum wage and then pay them little for as much as they deal with, right? And they don't invest in their employees, and so they leave. There's high turnover. They don't train them. And so if they don't train them, then they're being negligent, in my opinion, as an agency, right? And so the reason I am so, like, against this shit is because, I don't know, my Utah people may know, I have a sister that's low functioning autistic, and she's 4 years younger than me. And my mom is getting older. She can't handle physically my sister anymore. And so they ended up having to put my sister in a home, like a residential placement. And the first night there, the neighbor complained because my sister became dysregulated. And when they get so dysregulated like that, I mean, you know, Hannah, there is no way to talk them out of it.
Right. Talking is probably the worst thing to do.
And so they called the police. The neighbors called the police, and a police officer responded and put my sister in handcuffs.
Oh.
And cognitively, she's like 5 or 6 years old. She doesn't understand what was going on.
Right.
And so it made her freak out more. And then they have these people in the homes where my mom would pick Amy, her name's Amy, pick her up on the weekends, and she would come with bruises and a black eye. And the staff told my mom that she hit herself hard enough to give herself a black eye. And I'm like, okay, Mom, if in the 30 years that you've raised Amy, have you ever seen her hit herself so hard to give her a black eye? She's like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, well, there you go. And if she is hitting herself that hard, then that's a whole nother issue that she's starting self-harm after 30 years of not engaging.
Right.
I think these residential placements, some of them, not all of them, who have a lack of training, lack of income, lack of resources for the mental health field, it's just not as bad as what you've been talking about, but there's still shit going on.
And even to speak on the officer you talked about, they don't have any training on how to deal with this population. Mm-hmm. So to put her in handcuffs, that's just traumatizing her more.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't a harm to the community.
No.
Right? She's not a criminal. Mm-hmm. So doing that was unnecessary. But to the person's defense, they probably didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. I mean, because she's a big girl and flailing her arms but no, wrong approach. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Poor Amy.
I know.
So with that, we'll take a break. And during this break, we definitely want to thank Lynn of Springfield. Thank you very much. She is
Thanks,
one of our...
Lynn from Springfield.
And we also want to give a shout out to Heather from New Jersey. She is one of our patrons. And if you want to become one of our patrons, go to wickedwanderingspodcast.com and you can make a donation to our podcast as little as $3 per month. If you do enjoy the content that you hear, please go to wickedwanderingspodcast.com.
Since you guys are here listening, you must be a fan of the podcast.
Woohoo!
And if you want to show your support, head over to wickedwanderingpodcast.com. Click on the support tab and choose a monthly subscription starting at just $3 a month. Your contributions will directly fuel our podcast production, and as a thank you, we'll give you a shout out in every episode.
Woohoo! And you know what might be fun too? If we will say your name and your favorite haunting place, murder mystery, or serial killer, we would love to know.
All right, and now back to the show.
There were, however, facilities like Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane in the mid to late 1800s that was known for their moral treatment. And these people had hotel-like spaces to sleep. They dressed appropriately for the time. They had a library, parlor, and even entertainment where shows came in. The staff were interviewed and references checked to make sure that they would treat the patients with human dignity. Unfortunately, not all facilities could be like this, especially the public ones. And when public asylums were made, like the Worcester one, corners were cut. There was no parlor or outside entertainment.
Funding.
Pay was low, as with many state-run places, and so people got hired off the street with no need for references or character checks. Old ways of dealing with the patients were returning. And it's the same here when we talk about even the public school system. You have families that can afford to put their children in private school systems, and then you have other people that can be left behind just because of status and where you're from. So times haven't changed.
Not really. I mean, to some extent, yes, but the same problems keep showing themselves, but in different ways.
Mm-hmm. You're really quiet. I just want to make sure that you don't want to add anything.
No.
Okay.
It's a lot to process. I think I'm just processing through it.
Okay, no problem. We are going to start going into the 1900s, where I want to start by reading this quote from the book that I talked about, Mad in America by Robert Whitaker, which I highly recommend. So, and here I quote, "In a stream of scientific articles, newspaper editorials, and popular books, the mentally ill were described as a degenerate strain of humanity, social wastage that bred in alarming rates and burdened normal Americans with the great expense of paying for their upkeep. America's embrace of that notion led to a wholesale societal assault on the severely mentally ill. They were prohibited from marrying in many states, forcibly committed to state hospitals in even ever greater numbers, and in a number of states sterilized against their will. America's genesis even encouraged Nazi Germany in its massive sterilization of the mentally ill, a program that led directly to the crematoriums of the Holocaust.
I don't know if it's just my sister or the Smirnoff that's just making me so angry. Maybe both.
When I read that, I literally like verbal, like, what?
Yeah.
Like, where is this book going and what is it trying to tell me? And then we're going to start talking about eugenics, and this is stuff they don't tell you in history, at least not in my history classes that I remember.
No.
You know, we're like, we were the allies. Like,
That's what I'm saying.
it had a huge influence, and it irks me so bad. But
This is going to be a 3-hour long episode because we're just going to talk about all the injustices and anger we're experiencing right now as mental health providers.
Charles Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton, developed a term called eugenics, which means well-born. His philosophy was that in order to make a high society, we have to breed accordingly. I am putting this very simply, but basically, unless you are white, intelligent, and well-bred, then you should not have the right to procreate. In America, the individuals who were funding this type of research were people like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller Jr.
Wow.
Which for some reason, that boggled my mind.
Just because you have money doesn't mean you're smart.
Right. Due to the influx of immigration, the WASPs, right, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants of America, were blaming insanity on the immigrants, such as the Irish, which bothered me, obviously.
That explains a lot about my husband. Just kidding. And I can say that because he doesn't listen.
Oh, that's right. You are a Goonin. I forgot that.
I am.
There was a great push to put the mentally ill in asylums and sterilize as well as castrate. Racism and hate was a driving force in all of this because depending on where you were from or where your family was originally, depended on the crimes you would commit. So there was basically a section in there where he was like, if you're Irish, these are the things you're accused of. If you're Portuguese, these are the things you're accused of. It's like, what?
Discrimination at its finest,
What?
right?
And one of the crimes that the Irish were accused of is too much procreating. They were mad because they were making too many babies. Like, what?
That's a go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry. I just want to underscore something you said before, which was about, to put it simply, at least in the United States, talking 19th century, why did eugenics catch on so quickly? I mean, of course, part of it is just curiosity about innovations in medical science and medicine overall, but also it is a huge response to massive waves of immigration coming in. And I would also add, you talked about the WASP who are basically funding all of this. It's not just immigration, but it's also religion. There was a huge fear in the 19th century that with these new immigrants coming in, so many of them were Roman Catholics, that it would tip the tide of religion in the United States.
Yeah, very true. Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, we can go into a whole about, what they were afraid of with the Irish or the Portuguese, as you've already mentioned, but just kind of as a general cast, they were afraid of immigrants. They were afraid that the Roman Catholics would take over.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. So Jess
Yes.
and Jonathan, what is all of this reminding you of? Hitler!
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to that before.
I skipped ahead.
Yes.
I feel, at least from my experience, we do not talk about how this idea was discussed and researched here in America. I did not know the extent to which these things were happening here in the States. And so I'm actually going to quote again, because I'm actually really in love with this book. It's really good. So I'm going to quote from Out in America again. Because honestly, like when I'm researching, and Jess, I'm sure you can attest, sometimes you can't paraphrase. Yes,
You just need to write it all down.
Yeah, it's just, there's no point paraphrasing because it's what is being said is the best way to read it. So the committee to study and to report on the best practical means of cutting off the defective germplasm in the American population calculated that 10% of the American population was defective and should be sterilized. It was an agenda that pleased former President Theodore Roosevelt, which I did not know because now I don't like Theodore Roosevelt.
Ew.
At present, he wrote the committee, there is no check to the fecundity of those who are subnormal.
Well done.
Thank you. That was a hard word for me today. During a national eugenics conference that year funded by John Harvey Kellogg, inventor of the flake cereal, the scope of the needed enterprise was further defined. Over the next 40 years, the country needed to sterilize 5.76 million Americans in order to reduce the percentage of defectives in the population to an acceptable level. And I just want to say, so now every time you have that bowl of cornflakes in the morning, you can think how this man tried furthering the future of eugenics and has the mass genocide of millions.
Boycott cornforflakes.
Boycott cornflakes.
They're not delicious anyway, so I don't think any of us would miss it if we did.
Nope. I hereby am boycotting Kellogg's cornflakes. Can we put that on our sweatshirts?
Boycott. Boycott Kellogg.
I just want to reiterate here that I'm trying to build up to talking about individual asylums and hauntings. I just want our people to know that. But personally, I believe it is important to talk about what was happening during these times. In order to understand what these patients were going through, we need to understand what was happening in history and what they were hearing from doctors, nurses, staff, and other patients. I think it would be impossible for these patients not to hear about this movement of eugenics being pushed in society. That they were hearing they were worthless and should be thrown away like garbage. Like, you can't tell me these people were in asylums and not hearing staff talk about this, right?
That's horrible.
So when people go into these asylums and they do these haunting trips, don't you want to understand, like, why they're still hanging around, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's been a space full of trauma. Yeah. No wonder.
Right. So here I am quoting again. The society focused on promoting eugenics to the American public, getting textbooks and pamphlets into schools, and conducting informational campaigns to build support for sterilization laws. One of its popular traveling exhibits, consisting of a board with blinking lights, was titled, "Some People Are Born to Be a Burden on the Rest." Every 15 seconds, a light flashed to warn onlookers that American taxpayers had just spent another $100 caring for defectives. Every 30 seconds, a light flashed to signal that another defective had been born. At intervals of 50 seconds, a flashing light told of another criminal being carted off to prison, with the audience informed that very few normal persons ever go to jail. Finally, after 7.5 long minutes, a light blinked to announce that a high-grade person at long last had been born.
All I have to say is, fuck that shit.
Thank you. Jonathan?
What I'm kind of curious about is that, I mean, we talk about people who are genuinely mentally ill, who are being factored in. And we mentioned a little bit about, you know, women particularly being thrown in just for having a big imagination or you know, hysteria. Yes. What other kinds of people who we wouldn't consider now as needing additional medical attention? Like, I know that persons who are LGBTQ are also considered mentally defective at this period of time. Are there other groups of people who have been factored into this?
So, and I hear what you're saying. So they did talk a lot about individuals with schizophrenia or bipolar, which we would still consider it a mental illness now. Individuals with depression. I'm sure there was a lot of women that had
melancholy. I think they referred to it back then.
But like postpartum depression. I think of my kiddos with autism that just think and learn a little bit differently. But I'm thinking of like my heavy hitter kids that would be put in this. So I understand what you're saying. Like, how many of these people would we not consider mentally ill? I think it's a good question.
I think my other question is, and maybe I'm just completely going down a rabbit path, but we talk a lot about the asylums in the Northeast. Did they have the same kind of network of asylums in the South?
Not that I read so far. Not yet. I mean, granted, I haven't finished my book. I haven't finished my research, so I'm sure there are some things I just haven't gotten to yet.
Well, and I think what we see is people that come along with good intentions, and it starts well, but then the funding disappears. And so it becomes more of survival out of necessity rather than healing with good intentions. I mean, I don't have a specific case, but it just seems like that's the same old story of these mental asylums, is that it's all started with people who want to make change and help people, and then
overcrowding.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point.
I do also want to bring the point that they even got the church involved, and I am going to quote again. To get the country's clergy involved, the AES, which was the community that they actually named, a sponsored annual contest with cash awards, up to $500 for ministers and priests who delivered the best eugenics sermon. So in 1928, Reverend William Matson of the Methodist Episcopal Church won the top prize of $500 by telling his congregation that, quote, modern science had proven all men are created unequal.
Okay, so it goes against the Constitution.
Oh.
And then he also said, we may raise a pig in the parlor, but he remains a pig.
And what year was this?
This was 1928. It was not that long ago. It was 100 years ago.
I don't doubt that there's a lot of racism also factored into that.
Yes.
That's also the period of time of white nationalism, and I'm trying to remember that awful movie that Woodrow Wilson loved. Super racist. I know this goes off topic.
No, it's okay.
It's like the Ku Klux Klan movie. I'll figure it out and I'll come back.
Okay.
Wait. I don't doubt that calling out the pig in the parlor and talking about not all people are created equal is definitely wound up in the same giant eugenics, racism, white people first, white nationalism idea all at once.
This is what happens when you mix religion, politics, and mental health.
Yeah, right.
But that's a whole nother episode.
The Supreme Court in 1927 ruled that sterilization was constitutional, and by the end of 1945, 45,127 Americans had been sterilized under these laws, and 21,311 of those people were patients in state mental hospitals. Against their will, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
They were giving away their options, like just taken away. Like just something that really made my head spin was that America had a huge influence on eugenics in Germany and the start of Hitler's regime. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Again, I'm reading from Mad in America. Great book. America's influence on Nazi Germany was particularly pronounced, and it was in that country, of course, that eugenics ran its full course. Prior to World War I, eugenics was not nearly as popular in Germany as it was in the United States. In 1925, Adolf Hitler, I don't speak German, sorry, in Mein Kampf, thank you guys, hailed eugenics as the science that would rebuild the nation. The state, he wrote, must, quote, avail itself of modern medical discoveries and sterilize those patients who are unfit for procreation.
So for background, and if you're not familiar, or maybe some of the readers aren't familiar with Mein Kampf, it's his personal doctrine. It's his Magnus Opus, or Opus. Yeah, I think that's
I've heard of it, but like I didn't know what it was.
It's the central tenet of what Hitler believed.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Jonathan. See, this is
You're
why
welcome.
we keep him around.
That's why we love
These little
Jonathan.
I know, these little segments of information. After Hitler came to power in 1933, Germany passed a comprehensive sterilization bill. The German eugenics who drew up that legislation had gone to school on the U.S. experience, which American eugenics noted with some pride. The leaders in the German sterilization movement state repeatedly that their legislation was formulated only after careful study of the California experiments. And this was the person who wrote that was Margaret Smith, who was superintendent of Stockton State Hospital after touring Germany in 1935. So who was American. And she also said it would have been impossible, they say, to undertake such a venture involving 1 million people without drawing heavily upon previous experience elsewhere.
That's ridiculous.
The fuck? Excuse my French.
Really heavy.
I think that's more
Yeah.
redneck than French.
Oh, okay. That works too.
Just kidding.
This idea of merciful killings started as well, where this idea of if you aren't going to get better, let's just kill you by poison.
I mean, that's for horses who break a leg, like not for human beings.
The caseloads of the doctors were incredibly large, over 100 patients per doctor. Sometimes patients would not see a doctor for a year. The attendants in these hospitals were underpaid compared to people working in state prisons, and the fact that they were left to their own devices with these patients, they became creative in the way they managed, quote, order. So I'm actually going to read a snippet that's in Mad in America, but it's what woman Marl Woodson's own experience was, because she was a newspaper reporter who was hospitalized in an Oklahoma asylum for a while, and this is her own words. Wet toweling a patient is choking him unconscious by getting a wet towel around his neck and twisting on it from the back until he succumbs. Sometimes a pillow slip is used instead of a towel. Soaping a man down means knocking him down with a slug made of a hard bar of soap in the toe of a sock. Such a slug will knock a patient down, often rendering him unconscious, without leaving telltale marks. The wet towel treatment also leaves no marks or scars for inquisitive officials, hospital authorities, or unexpected visitors to find. Hurrah for the inventive genius of younger America. It finds ways to make itself safe. Which I feel like that's a lot of sarcasm that she was.
I would hope so.
imparting.
But this is abuse.
It's abuse.
This is abuse. This is something that would get you or I fired.
Yeah.
Right now.
Oh,
which is
absolutely.
comforting.
Yes.
But
right.
at the same time, this is ridiculous that they thought this would help.
And so in the 1930s, American Medical Association actually hired a young physician named John Grimes, and they wanted him to do like surveys throughout 174 state hospitals to kind of be like, all right, what's happening in these places? Because we don't know what's going on in all of them. So he ended up sending out surveys and visiting almost all of them. And he wrote up this whole thing that just basically talks about, you know, how it looks beautiful from the outside. They keep up the grounds, and then you get into these places and it's overcrowded. They're in dining rooms and hallways where cots are. That's where they should be eating and hanging out. And he even found instances of disturbed patients having to sleep two to a bed. Attendants, he said, acted like prison guards. Wards were locked and the windows barred. As for feeding the patients, the hospitals often had to rely on what could be reaped from their own farms. So eggs were a rare delicacy. Few could give them milk. And they served to confine people unwanted by society, including many who were not mentally ill, but were there because of unsocial or antisocial manifestations. So you're socially awkward, you're going here. And the worst part is he wrote up this whole thing for the MAA, and they told him to change his report. He refused, and they fired him.
Of course they did.
And then he ended up having this published on his own, but no one would listen to him. And I'm leaving on that good note.
This just makes me so angry.
I know. I've been so angry, but like I said earlier, I think it'll give us a good background. And so when we are talking about these hauntings, we can kind of understand these people a little bit more and why some of them are stuck.
Yeah, I can
Like, they
imagine.
weren't treated nicely, and maybe why some of them killed themselves, because how could you live with that?
Yeah,
You know?
Sure.
Yeah, really good context, if really sobering.
Yeah. I know it's a lot, but I'm actually kind of I don't want to say enjoying. I am
Intrigued.
yes about the history and realizing that yes, we are doing better in the mental health field, but we can do more better.
There's also a lot of work.
There is a lot of work. More trauma-informed care
Yes.
is definitely needed.
Yes. Also, do you get into lobotomies?
Oh, girl, I am so excited for lobotomies.
We can totally talk about Rose Kennedy.
Yes.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, John's like,
That is
yes.
exactly where I went.
Mm-hmm.
Whole episode on the Kennedys.
Oh, yeah. Oh, honestly, we should do a whole episode on the Kennedys because they're a family.
Yeah, well,
A lot of stuff has happened to the Kennedys.
they're probably, they are from Massachusetts, so I can see them in 1692 being the Putnams and hanging
Putnams.
people for witchcraft.
So thank you guys for coming on this journey with me.
Yes.
Until next time. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening today. This show wouldn't be possible without our amazing producer and editor, Rob Fitzpatrick, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the best content.
And a special thanks to Taiga Soundprod for providing the captivating intro music. Cinematic Intro 24.
And of course, we can't forget the hauntingly beautiful outro music, Rhino's Theme, composed by Kevin MacLeod.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms, like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Your feedback means the world to us.
Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses, updates, and more thrilling content. You can find us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Stay curious,
Keep exploring,
and always remember to keep on wandering.